Okay, so the next uh, section of Slack and Wise discusses the ways that we've thought about technology as falling out of human control. And they outline two different ways in which we see this in this fear in our culture. One is the idea of megatechnics, right? The idea, as they explain it, that society itself is a mega machine. And so, on the one hand, we could talk about this as, that we use technology in order to control society, right? As we talked about before. But the flip side of this is that if society is a machine, right, that means that the majority of people are actually not in control. That there are a few kind of at the top, right, who have access to the technology, who are using that to manipulate the rest of us. Um, and that those technocrats, right, at the top, who are in control, then use new technologies and need to develop new technologies in order to control the mega machine itself. So this is one example of kind of a cultural fear where the machines are controlling us. The second way that they discuss this is, as they call it, the revenge of unintended consequences. The idea that we may have technologies that we think are going to do great things and empower us, but then have unintended ramifications that we aren't able to control and end up actually causing more problems than they solve. So they point to the idea of the paperless office, right? If we just make everything green and use digital technologies, then that's going to eliminate the need for paper and waste and is going to actually make us more efficient. When actually what they find is that as we introduce more and more technologies into workplaces, it actually produces more paper because it's easier to print more when you have more and more efficient technologies. Also, telecommuting, right, which is something that we're all kind of doing right now. Um, if you have to drive to work or you have to be in a particular location in order to work, then the idea is that we're kind of hindered, right, and don't have flexibility because we're bound to the workplace physically. Telecommuting allows us, some level of control over where we can be, but in fact, what they say here, what Slack and Wise point to is that with telecommuting, we're actually working more and more, right? Because there's this belief that we can access work whenever we need to. And so, rather than cutting down on work, it actually binds us to work even more. This all fits in with the larger master slave narrative that Slack and Wise discuss in the next section. Um, So, on the one hand, technology is supposed to enable us greater autonomy, um, but what we see is that, in fact, often the technologies end up uh, having greater power over us. And so, if we look at the idea of alienation, this is a concept that Karl Marx used to describe how workers in the factory actually ended up losing a sense of themselves, right? Because under industrial capitalism, you do not, as a worker, have the ability to control what you produce. So Marx argues that you become alienated from your own product. The technological infrastructure then of the factory is, in a sense, then controlling the worker, right? Because you're making something that you do not have complete control over. And Marx argues that, in a sense, we become part of the machine, right? That we are sucked into the machine itself. and are dominated by it. So Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times, there's a famous scene that really highlights this idea pretty well, and so I'll share that clip with you right now. And I think you can use this as kind of a way of understanding how technology, particularly in the workplace, reduces our autonomy.
Section 5, keep it the limit.
So you can see here that Chaplin is, working on the assembly line and gets sucked into the machine itself, right, as they speed up the production. And after emerging from the machine, he's kind of lost his mind. And so this is one way of kind of understanding this concept of alienation, that he's no longer in control of himself. He's been overtaken by the technology. So see here, he can't help himself from turning those screws. And now she thinks she's being chased inappropriately, and the police officer is now going to punish the worker for having lost their sense of self in the workplace. Okay. So the second way in which we see this master and slave dynamic play out with technology is through this idea of dependence, right? So not only do we lose our autonomy, but then we may become dependent on technologies. Um, Unable to to live without them because they've become so integrated into our lives, right? So on the in the example of alienation, the technology basically consumes us, but with dependence, it's that we are unable to live without the technologies, right? And so the Y2K example is one good demonstration of how this fear of technological dependence exists. In 1999, as the new year was turning to 2000, there was a big panic because supposedly computers were not going to be able to reset their dates to go back to 00. And there was a lot of concern that this was going to impact banking, national security, all the kinds of institutions that really depend on technologies and particularly for financial uh, uh, transactions, right? That like people would just lose all of their money at the stroke of midnight when the new millennium turned. Um, this obviously didn't happen, but it was kind of through the late 90s, 98 and 99, as the millennium approached. This was sort of a big cultural panic that we experienced about our overdependence on technology and what happens then if the technology ceases to function. So we see in our culture then, and films like The Terminator, The Matrix, this constant fear that the machines will take over, and these concerns are being amplified now with the growth of artificial intelligence, right? Where computers are actually able to teach themselves how to accomplish particular tasks and no longer rely on the direct programming from humans. So you were going to have a quiz on the reading from James Curran due on Friday at 5 p.m. It's another 10 question multiple choice quiz. And you might want to consider how some of the themes in that reading relate back to the ideas of control discussed in Slack and Wise. And then your final paper is going to be due not on Monday, but on Saturday at 11:59 p.m. The reason for that is that the semester is officially over by that point. And so I want to make sure that you are working within the confines of the semester. If you have difficulty uh, completing that by Saturday, please email me and let me know. But you're going to need to tell me in advance. So please get back to me by Friday at 5 p.m. When your quiz is due if you do not believe you're going to be able to complete your paper by Saturday at 11:59. And let me know the reason, and we can talk about a possible extension if necessary. Um, but I do want you to have enough time to complete that and to do a solid job. It is worth 300 points, so that's a pretty significant portion of your grade, 30% of your grade. And I want you to have the time to watch the film, Generation Like, and to consider all four aspects of the received view in that film. So Again, if you have questions, please email me, let me know, and if the Saturday 11:59 p.m. deadline is going to be a problem, then again, please let me know in as much advance as possible. Definitely by Friday at 5. Okay, be in touch if there are any questions or concerns, and have a great week.